we've tried to really come up with different ways for employees as a whole to engage and have them understand what's going on at a giving level and not just know that that's being taken care of, but that they could actually play an active role and part in that.
In 2016, I co-founded a drinkware company called Simple Modern. I was obsessed with the question, what would happen if we built a for-profit company focused on generosity? This podcast is a behind-the-scenes look at how we scaled from a bootstrapped startup to 9 figures in annual revenue. We'll share with you the strategies we used, things learned along the way, and how we built a different type of company. This is Scaling for Good. Welcome back to Scaling for Good. I'm Mike Beckham, your host. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Simple Modern. In the summer of 2015, I went on a date night with my wife that would change the rest of my life. During that dinner, I told her that I'd been approached by 2 other friends who wanted to start a company. And I thought, after years of dreaming about it, that I was ready to take the jump, and I wanted to know what she thought. And to my surprise and excitement, she was on board and excited as well. And as we began to dream about what the company could look like, we started to talk about who would be the people that if we could build a company out of anyone, who would it be? And we started to make a list of names, the highest character, most gifted people that we had met during our time together as a married couple. That list of 15 names became very significant in the company's history because as we began to grow, I one by one went down that list and recruited those people to join the company. And many of them did join the company and are still a part of the company today. There's a lot of content out there about how do you grow a company, but there's surprisingly little about how do you strive to be excellent in the other areas of life that matter, in your relationships and work-life balance. How do you pursue business with excellence while still trying to be excellent in all of the other ways that matter? That's what this episode is about, and I'm happy to be joined by my wife, Heather Beckham. So, Heather, how did you feel when I first shared with you that I wanted to start a company?
Well, I think I felt really excited because I knew it had been a dream on your heart for quite a long time. And I knew that you were completely capable and ready. And it just felt like a very exciting moment that it was finally time to pull the trigger and time to kind of envision and move forward to what that could actually look like. And so getting to make that list with you, I just felt really involved and included. And I really think that was the basis of how I continue to feel today. That meeting had a lot of impact in my involvement in the company from the very start. And so it was a very pivotal moment, I think, not only in our marriage and where we ended up coming today as a couple, but then in the future of the company, obviously.
Yeah. It's funny, all of the things you talk about with, in marriage that you look forward to. And then there's these moments when it's like, oh, this is really happening.
Yeah.
Like it's game time. And so I'm the same way. I look back on that moment with really, it's just such a happy memory. And I think honestly, like you being so supportive and excited about it, instead of immediately seeing, oh, here are all the risks or here are all the reasons why that could be scary, instead being supportive and excited about it gave me a lot of confidence to move forward, that I knew that I had your support. So for everybody listening, can you share a little bit of your story leading up to Simple Modern and when we founded the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated from the University of Oklahoma in 2004 with a bachelor's and master's degrees in accounting, and spent a little bit of time in the oil and gas industry as a tax accountant, but quickly found my calling was actually the same as yours, to the nonprofit ministry world. And so Mike and I spent a series of years, for me it ended up being 7, for him it was 10, in the nonprofit ministry world. And that really cemented a lot of our interactions as a marriage and our vision and purpose as a couple, I think, going forward, which plays into what Simple Modern is today. But then in 2011, I had my first child. And so I transitioned to being a full-time stay-at-home mom. And that had always been a dream of mine to be able to do that. And I'm really fortunate that that was a possibility in our family. And so that's really been the role that I've played. That's my primary title. But when Simple Modern started from that infamous meeting where we made the list, I've wanted to be involved at some level. And so as the opportunity has arisen, I have been able to help contribute to different parts of the company, most notably the charitable aspect in giving. So that's where I've really found my involvement in the company, is to help direct how we give the funds that we've dedicated to our nonprofit partners.
Okay, so you mentioned that you picked up 2 degrees at OU. You picked up something else. You got a husband out of the deal.
Got a husband in there too. Yeah, that wasn't the plan, but it happened.
That's right. I'm very persuasive
Yeah,
when I want to be.
I will say that you are very persuasive.
And so one of the jokes I tell people is that it took me 5 years to get 1 degree, and Heather got 2 in 5 years, so she lapped me. But I was able to persuade her to marry me, so I guess I'm the real winner in this deal. And then I think another thing that you mentioned that's worth noting is how formative our 20s were as a couple. We both spent most of that time working in the nonprofit ministry world, and it really established a lot of kind of the dream for our life, the way that we thought about financial resources. Like, we had to actually raise our salary when we were in the nonprofit world, which is not easy. And it's obviously not a super lucrative, you don't go into nonprofit ministry because you're really concerned about maximizing your income. And yet I look back on those years really fondly, like just some of my favorite years when we were together doing that together. And so years of being able to work side by side before kids. So we've obviously experienced a lot of growth over the last several years with the company. What's been the most exciting part of the growth from your perspective?
So from my perspective, the most exciting part of the growth has been that the more growth that there has been, there's more lives that are impacted. Everything about Simple Modern goes back to the mission of the company, which is we exist to give generously. When you walk into the doors of Simple Modern, it's on the wall. We exist to give generously. And everything comes back to this mission and vision. And so the more growth we have, the more that we get to give and to be generous. And this goes for all areas of the business, goes for our employees, our customers, and our nonprofit partners. And so I think what I get really excited about as the business grows is that's more people that get to be influenced and that we get to influence and that get to have their lives changed ultimately. Might be in a small way, or like with a lot of our nonprofit partners, the people that they serve, it's in very large ways. And so it's exciting when growth equals something very valuable and significant in terms of changed lives of people, not just monetary things, but actual impact in lives.
Yeah. I think that's something that both you and I took away from being in the ministry world, the nonprofit world, is what really motivated us was when we heard examples of people's lives being transformed or changed, their perspectives changing. And it became important, I know, to me and to you, that I was able to draw a straight line between the work that I did each day and it actually making some kind of an impact tangibly in the lives of other people. So I would definitely share that perspective. And I think that's one of the distinctives of the company, is that we didn't just set out to build a company that was profitable or that could support our family, or even a company where we could do some giving, but we were trying to be from the start intentional about how do you build something where it's really clear how you're positively, redemptively impacting the lives of people that rub up against that thing, whether that's the people that we work with or customers or nonprofits or anything else. So I would agree. That's been super motivating.
And I love that in starting the company, you guys didn't even know, you and the co-founders, what you were going to sell. You just knew the mission and the vision, and that was going to carry you guys through whatever you ended up selling or whatever kind of business it ended up being. You didn't even know at the beginning what that was.
Well, and I disappoint people all the time because they ask me about the founding story and they want to have some, like Isaac Newton, I'm under a tree and an apple falls and hits me and I have this amazing vision. And, they'll say, how did you know drinkware? Or, how'd you come up with the name Simple Modern? What a great name. And I'm like, man, the real stories are so much lamer than you would imagine. Like the story of how we came to the name Simple Modern, which I love now as our brand, is that we were trying to register to sell on Amazon, and our first choice of name, which had been available, had been taken overnight. And I'm so thankful that, by the way, that first name that we were going to use had been taken, because it would be a terrible name for a brand. But then we had to scramble. Like, we really literally didn't know what to do. And we just had to find a name that nobody was using. And Simple Modern was the first thing that we found that we could all stomach. And really the first year of the company, we were kind of like, should we change it? Because we didn't really arrive at that name because we loved it. We needed something. And over the years, it's turned into something that means a lot to a lot of people. But I don't have a great story about where it came from. And like you said, we didn't have product all figured out. We didn't know that we wanted to do drinkware and eventually everything that it would become. But we did know we wanted to build a different type of company. And I think that was one of the influences that you've really had on me through the process. Is you've really helped. I feel like what you've emphasized to me is to keep the most important things the most important things. And that what the company is about is more important than how much it sells, and it's more important than what it sells. And you helping keep that in front of me has helped me keep that in front of the company. And so, like you said, early on, we knew the type of culture we wanted to have. We knew we wanted generosity to be a core piece. And so in a lot of ways, Simple Modern is a lot more a company about an idea and a type of a way that you can run a business than it is about what we sell. So we're really more of an idea company that happens to sell drinkware to help, pay the bills and keep the lights on. Faith has been a huge part of you and I's life. Obviously, we spent years working in nonprofit full-time ministry together. How has faith played a role in how we've built the company?
I think it's played a tremendous role. It's really the basis for us as a marriage, for everything that we do. And that definitely flows down into how you lead the company and how I encourage you as your cheerleader to lead the company. I mean, because of God's generosity with us, that's why we want to be generous with other people. And in the Bible, it talks about God's ultimate generosity is expressed in him making a way for us to be with him forever. And so because of God's ultimate generosity, we want that reflected in our lives as well, and to be as generous as we can with other people. And so because of that basis of faith, that's the reason that we can be generous with others. And so I think in how it's played out in terms of Simple Modern, it's been very much a stair-step process of steps of faith to see if this was the path and the direction we were supposed to go. I mean, when you start a business, everything is very small in terms of taking those little steps of faith and seeing if that's how things are supposed to play out. So I think even though growth to me is not necessarily a synonym for success, I think the growth of the company has confirmed in those little steps of faith that we were on the path that God had called us to, and confirmed the calling that he had on our lives to start a company that gave generously.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, faith, another way of describing faith is just trust. And you can't be in entrepreneurship if you don't have a large degree of faith and a belief that it's going to work out. I've said before, and maybe some of it's naivete also, that like if you understood all the challenges and the odds that are stacked against you and you focused on it, you'd never start anything. And I think you're right. I think us having a core part of our identity being trust and faith has helped us to step out and do things that at times haven't made sense on paper and have been radical. I think there have been several points in the company's history. One of them that jumps out to me, and we're going to talk more about this, is very early on, we made the decision that we wanted to give away 10% of our profits every year. And we're a bootstrapped company, which meant we were way undercapitalized for our growth because you have to buy inventory to grow. And so just between taxes and everything else, like there's no money. There's no money to give if you want to grow the company. And yet we made that commitment. I think it was kind of like the intersection of generosity and faith of if we make a commitment to actually give, then good things are going to come from this, even though it doesn't make sense on paper. And you would never advise somebody who's bootstrapped and running a consumer company that has to buy inventory to do this. We're going to do this. And I think establishing that muscle early on, even when it was hard, even when it didn't make sense, has been pretty transformational and foundational with the company and our perspective. I mean, these days our giving budget's quite a bit bigger and it's a lot easier. There's kind of margin to be able to make things like our giving work. But in the early days, it didn't make sense. It wasn't logical, but it made sense from the perspective of the type of thing we wanted to be a part of building and what we want to be about. And I loved what you said also, that generosity starts with receiving, actually, instead of giving, that we have to kind of be shown the way to really develop generosity. We have to see generosity expressed, and then kind of we're mimetic. We imitate the things that we admire. And so for you and I, seeing the way that God has been generous with us has motivated us towards generosity. I think it's made a huge impact in the way that we've at least tried to approach building a different type of company. So you were married to an entrepreneur, which
Definitely.
is the most stable, boring, ordinary lifestyle you can pick, obviously. But I've been told that there are some challenges that come with being married to an entrepreneur. So what are some of the challenges that come with being married to an entrepreneur?
Well, I don't know what it's like to be married to all entrepreneurs. I know what it's like to be married to you as an entrepreneur.
Right. Okay.
So I'm going to comment specifically on that. But I'm guessing that some of these qualities maybe apply to other entrepreneurs, since you're kind of a representative of the group. You can be obsessive. Let's say
Yes.
you can focus very heavily on
Guilty.
what you're interested in. And when you're starting a business and everything is on you, your mind is, I can imagine, I haven't experienced it the same way, but is always on the business and always thinking about the next thing you need to do to make it successful, or to put that next step in. And so I saw points where that was all that was on your mind was the business, especially in the beginning. And so I think one of my roles was to help take you out of that mindset sometimes and say, hey, we need to get away from this for a little bit, so that way you can have some downtime and be able to really take care of yourself so that you can actually lead the business well. But I think probably most entrepreneurs experience that kind of mentality where it's just all they're thinking about, because it's all on you to get this started. And so I think a challenge can be really taking the time to think outside of that. Like we're talking about, the purpose of this podcast series is to talk about the work-life balance and the things that really matter ultimately in the end. And so I think a challenge as an entrepreneur can be just making sure that those things are still taking priority in the midst of probably the busiest season of life, trying to get a company off the ground. So that's what I really tried to do for you, was help get your mind off of it during those really busy times and help make sure you take care of yourself. And
yeah, it's fascinating that for all of us, whatever our biggest strengths are also highly correlated to our biggest weaknesses. So that same obsessiveness that can help me to problem solve and kind of doggedly go after something until I figure it out can be really destructive in certain contexts, right? Where I can't transition. A friend of mine once said that, separating for an entrepreneur, separating, their work life from their personal life is a little bit like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. And that analogy's always stuck in my head, because it really is. It's so difficult to try and separate things out. There's no, okay, I'm punching my card and now I'm done for the day and I don't have to think about work. It can be really all-encompassing. And I think one of the best things you did for me, I remember dinners where, after 45 minutes of me, I'm sure vomiting, word vomiting about Simple Modern, you're like, I'm very excited. Let's talk about something else, And that's what I needed, actually, is I needed that voice of saying, like, hey, your mind wants to obsessively just turn this one thing over and over and over again, but that's actually not going to be the most helpful thing for you. You need breaks. You need to cycle down. And I know this isn't the most important thing to you and the only thing that's important to you. And so for me, that's been, I think, a huge way that you have helped balance me out. Like, one of the things that's interesting about our marriage is that if you, any personality profile test that you throw at us, we basically come out as exact opposites, like Myers-Briggs. And it's not even like we're kind of like opposite letters in Myers-Briggs. It's like we're the exact opposites.
Strong opposites.
Like, she's like 100% sensing and I'm 100% intuitive. And so obviously there's some challenges with that. There's some times where we just miss each other altogether. But one of the things that I've seen that's been just so encouraging is how our differences allow us to complement each other so well. And I think I have some aspects of my personality that are really strong dispositions a particular way, and that you have helped balance that out. Another example that I think jumps out to me is it's very easy for entrepreneurs, especially in the early days where there's high stress and like you said, like high obsessiveness, to be exceptionally low on the empathy scale. To just like empathy is almost like, not on their radar at all. And yet you as a feeler and as my partner, I think you helped me to continue to keep empathy kind of in my tool belt and as something that I was thinking about and engaging on a heart level and not just like an intellectual level, which ultimately made me a better leader. So I think you're right, though. I'm guilty on the obsessive thing. That's probably always going to be the case, and now we have kids and I see some of those obsessive tendencies and I'm like, okay, that definitely comes from me.
Put aside money for therapy later, right?
Yeah, exactly. So how would you describe one of the big buzzwords now is work-life balance? And, different people will use that in different ways, mean different things. But for us, we've certainly tried to live our life where I have a job and I lead the company and I want to do that with excellence, but that's not the only thing. And that's not even the most important thing about me. So how would you unpack how we've strived to have, quote unquote, work-life balance in our life?
I will say that I think that buzzword, work-life balance, I think balance is a little bit of a myth. I don't really think that true balance exists in life. I think that you are always falling off on one side or the other. And I think that's been very true of us. And so I think what we've often done is just course correct, realize when we're falling off one side or the other and make sure that we go back the other way. Because it's just not real life that there's not going to be periods where work is busier or where family life is busier. And so I don't think achieving that perfect balance is actually feasible. I think it's just about being cognizant in the moment and in a season of what is happening and then being able to course correct, whether it's a day after, a week after, or after a season of either, going really hard after work, or maybe you've taken a lot of vacation and you need to buckle down at work, but just kind of realizing when that happens, where you need to kind of put in the time. I think one of the things that you've helped with in terms of work-life balance is, and that we've kind of adopted over time, is to not put off the vacation or the staycation. I think work is always going to be there, right?
Yeah.
Work is always, especially as an entrepreneur, it's always going to be there. That's
There's
something
always going to be
seen.
problems to solve, always going to be more.
Yeah, that's something I've seen from you, is that there's always something you could be doing. Even if there's not anything urgent or task-wise, you could come up with something that could be done to make the company better. And so I think with work kind of always being there, you have to be a little more proactive on maybe the life side in the work-life quote-unquote balance to make sure you take those vacations or staycations or prioritize that family time. So I think putting that stuff off is really easy to do. And we've done a lot of staycations just where we go away for a night in Oklahoma City. And that, it really, really helps to just get out of the context of your normal everyday life. And have a different scenery and a different change of pace. So that's one way that I think really in that kind of course correcting is to make sure you don't put off the time away, the vacation, the staycation, because it's really easy to do as an entrepreneur to say, well, things are much more urgent right now. We're busy. We have to get to this point. But it's really important to take those breaks.
Yeah, a lot of people will say, hey, entrepreneurship is attractive to me because I'd love to be my own boss. And I think what they envision is there's a lot of freedom and flexibility. I get to set my schedule. I get to decide what I do. And that sounds really attractive. But the reality is for most of us, what we end up doing is gravitating towards being workaholics, that we don't actually set any kind of boundaries. Like, yeah, you might technically be your own boss, but you work yourself harder than any other person would. And that you have to develop the own internal discipline to run a healthy schedule and to use the flexibility that you have in a positive way. And I think you're right. I think, again, this is a way where I'm not probably that unique. I've got this obsessive personality. And so, like one of the things we've joked about is that I can get in a spreadsheet, for example, and be working away and then be like, I haven't looked at the time in a while, and look up and it's 2:30 in the morning and not even notice it, and like, that's not normal, right? Like, that's not a good thing, right? You've been really helpful in helping me learn to lead myself and manage myself, and the freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur. And I really like what you said, like this idea of that all I've got to do is find exactly the right balance, and then I just go in steady state in that balance forever. Like, that's just not how life works at all. Even if you could find that balance, that works until somebody gets sick, or until something unexpected happens at work, or the house floods, because of a broken pipe or whatever. And you're never able to maintain that. And so the model that I've come to like is more of like a high intensity interval training, that the reality is I have things that matter deeply to me in my life, our family, my close friendships, my faith, the company, our giving. And the reality is I can't focus with maximum intensity on all those things simultaneously. It's just not possible for me. And there's periods where I need to focus on different areas, and that I've got to lay down and deprioritize things that are very important to me for a season. What I think you've really helped me to do is, and you mentioned this, is understand when I'm really over-indexing hard on something, and just make me aware. Like, hey, you've been going really hard at work. Or like, hey, you've been doing a great job of being there for me and the kids, but I know you got a lot on your plate at work, and we understand if you need to like if you can't be here for bedtime tonight and you need to go work on that presentation that you're going to give. And that's been helpful. In a lot of ways, I think what you've brought is self-awareness. You're almost like a mirror for me, because I can sometimes just not be very good at keeping track of how I'm allocating my time and how I'm balancing those things. And you being able to come at it from a different point of view with a different personality, and be able to say, hey, here's what I see, has been really insightful for me and really helpful. I've leaned on you for support a lot over the last several years. How would you describe how you've provided support to me as I've been trying to grow a business and balance all of the different things that come with this stage of life?
Well, I think at a high level, the biggest thing always is being your number one fan and your biggest cheerleader, no matter what comes in life or with the company. So even when there's hardship or confusion or failure, I think being there and knowing that I'm not going anywhere, and that I'll be your biggest support and your biggest fan, no matter what, is, in my mind, the biggest way that I can encourage and support you. I think also just being engaged in your world. I think in our marriage, we talked about earlier, that really early on in our 20s, we kind of had a precedent of being really involved in each other's work and knowing everything that was going on and doing a lot of that together. And so I think that precedent being set has helped me learn how to engage as you've moved on in different career journey and paths. I've learned how to really stay engaged with your work, and learned how to ask questions to bring out understanding what you do at work. And so I think that can look a lot of ways for people, even if it's just listening to stories about work. But I think a large part of support is understanding the spouse's world and what their work world looks like, because that's where they're spending the majority of their time. And it's really easy to gloss over that part in life when you've got family commitments and different things that have to be done in the evening or on the weekends. You could kind of get into that pattern of, how was work today, honey? Oh, fine. Okay, good. And you don't really go deeper on that. But I think it's a really key part to being a support system to you, just to understand what's going on in your world and the challenges that you're facing, and the things that are hard for you and the things that are encouraging to you. So I really try to listen first and foremost, but then also be engaged in that as much as I can, until you start talking about Amazon too much, and then I have to
and then you're done. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I do think one of the dynamics, I'm an external processor and you're a great listener. And so I can't even count how many times just you being willing to ask questions and listen to me and giving me a venue to externally process has led to the unlocks. I wish a lot of times that I could do more by internally processing, that I could work through things. But I think you and I both know that that's not, I'm a little bit deficient in that area, we'll say. But you've definitely helped me to unlock some things and to kind of process through some challenging situations just by being willing to listen and ask good questions. And again, it's one of those kind of complement things. Like, you're an internal processor and I'm an external processor. And sometimes it's like, well, this doesn't make any sense. But then there's other situations where I'm like, man, I am so thankful for that. I'm so thankful that I have somebody that can help draw me out that way, because that's what I really need. Another thing that I think has been helpful, and this is similar maybe to the thing we were talking about with the obsessiveness and time, is that it's really helpful to have someone who has a bias towards support, but is willing to say hard things to you. And especially as a CEO, you get less candid feedback from people because, people's jobs depend on your decisions, and people want you to like them generally and want you to be pleased with them. And there have been times where I needed you to challenge some thought processes that I had, because they were selfish or because they were misguided, or I wasn't putting myself in the shoes of somebody else. And I think you've done a good job of, I've always known that you were for me, but that doesn't mean that you weren't willing to push back. You've always been willing to challenge my perspective when I needed that. And I think that that's made me a better leader. This is all the stuff that happens, behind the scenes that other people don't see. And, I already mentioned it, but the way that you've helped me to make sure that I'm a leader that's leading with empathy. That is, empathy is like a foreign language, to my personality type. We're about, being out there and pioneering and what's in the future. And you've helped really center me on the emotions and experiences of the people that I'm leading every day. And all these things have been really helpful. So that kind of, I think, dovetails nicely into the next question that I have for you, which is, you've provided a lot of support, but I've also needed challenge. I guess I just mentioned a couple of the ways that I feel like you have challenged me. How do you feel like you've helped provide appropriate challenge for me over the last few years?
Well, I think having that, like we have mentioned before, the basis of our mission and vision being the same, and me being on board with that from the start of the company, it's been easy when there are things that don't align with that to call you out or to challenge those perspectives. Like, hey, we started the company to give generously. Like, why aren't we doing more in this area? So really having that foundation of that mission and vision has really allowed a room or a voice to be able to speak into when things might be seeming to go off track, and to challenge you in those ways. And then I think also just keeping you grounded in core relationships. Like you said, you can be more of a go-getter and a pioneer. And I think a lot of times I help just bring you back down to earth, reminding you of the very important key relationships in life and how that matters above all.
To make this more specific, can you give an example of what that looks like in our marriage, where you challenge me, especially around mission and vision and some of these things?
Yeah. So with the mission of the company being to give generously, I feel like I've always just thought about how can we give as much as we can. Like, what is the maximum we can do? How can we be super countercultural as a company? Because even the 10% that we're committed to giving, I feel like that's kind of, at least in my mind, it could be a token, right? Like, there's a lot of companies that could give that amount, but what would it take for us to give even more? Like, so I know I've asked you before, like, why can't we give maybe, what would it take for us to give 50% someday? Or, how can we move this from 10 to 20%? But I think challenging you on that basis of the mission and vision and values, and how do we keep pushing that bar higher, even from what it's at, to be radical in our mission, and to be countercultural in how we operate as a company too.
This is one of the things I love about our relationship. In many ways, you're the conservative one. I'm the person who's like risk, tolerance is broken, and I'm willing to do crazy things. And yet in this particular area, I feel like this was a big part of us wanting to even marry each other, is that we were so excited about the idea of generosity. And I feel like nobody pushes me to be more radical in that area than you do, which is extremely exciting, and it makes me really feel like we're in it together. And that there's one area where I'm not the biggest thinker, and I'm not the most radical thinker. When it comes to generosity, you're an even more radical thinker than I am, and I love that. I love the way that you push me there. So how have we gone about protecting and prioritizing our marriage and our relationship throughout growing the company and all the demands that have come with that?
I think every relationship obviously is different. So this, there's not going to be a guidebook for what works well for each couple. But one of the things that I've loved that you've done to protect and prioritize our relationship is during the workday, you always take my calls, unless you just absolutely can't. Like, obviously, if you're in a speaking situation, speaking to a group of people, you can't take my calls. But even when you're in executive meetings and you're having discussions, if I call, you will tell them, hey, I got to step out, my wife's calling. And that just really shows me the value that I have, not just at the end of the day, but during the workday, that whatever's going on in my life matters to you, and that you can take a couple minutes to figure out what that is, and whether it's to encourage me or give guidance. It's been one of the ways that you've really shown me that my world and our relationship is important, not just at home, but even while you're at work. And so that's meant a lot to me. Yeah. But I think also the traditional, you hear a lot of people talk about date nights, and we've never been like a super structured, like we have to have it once a week and it's always on Friday, and nothing messes with that. But we do make date nights a priority, especially when maybe it's been a while if we haven't had individual time to talk one-on-one. We will make that a priority. And I do think that that's key too. You've got to have that time, just the two of you, outside of the kids. Those people that have families know that's the hardest part, is to find that time outside of the kids when they're not running around in the background. But to have that time individually to just sit and talk, I think is the biggest way to protect and prioritize, because you've got to get on the same page. You've got to process life together. So those date nights have ended up being really key for us.
Yeah, one of the things that I feel like I learned the hard way after we had worked together for years, and then I started working in the business world, was, I'm so driven and I want to be excellent. I want to do the most that I possibly can. And I realized after about a year in the business world that I was giving 100% of my capacity during the workday. And what was happening is, by the time I got home, I did not have much left. You were getting a little bit of a shell of Mike, because I had spent pretty much everything I had to give, all of the emotional capacity, all of the words during the workday. And so for me, one of the things that I learned is it is not good to give 100% at my job. If my job was the only thing I did and it was the only thing that was important to me, then yes, I should give 100% of my capacity towards it. But that's not the person I want to be, and that's not the life I want to live. And so I've learned that I have to have the discipline of pacing myself a little bit during the day. I still want to go hard. I still want to be excellent, but I don't want to give 100% of what I have during the day, because I do want to have, for you and for our children, I want to be there. I want to be present, and I want to have capacity when I get home. So that's one of the ways that I've learned I have to kind of protect myself if I'm going to be able to be the person that I want to be. The startup experience is a massive roller coaster of emotions. It's been said that, one day you're like, we're going to be rich, we're going to the moon. And the next day it's like you're preparing for your bankruptcy. And there's a lot of ups and downs. You've definitely experienced the ups and downs, at least vicariously through me. So how have you managed all the ups and downs that have come with, being a part of a startup? So
you mentioned this earlier, but again, we're complete opposites. And one of the ways that we are complete opposites is in risk taking and how that expresses itself. So you want to take all the risks all the time, and I'm very risk averse. And so There have been a lot of times that there have been a lot of emotions when you come home and tell me what your next big plan or big thought is, of where you want to take the company. And so I always think my initial reaction is, don't respond in the moment. Don't respond in the moment of what you're actually thinking, because I want to say, that's a crazy idea. I don't know how that's going to work.
Totally freaked out.
Yes, totally freaked out. We're going to be living in a shack, whatever, because all the money, we're going to go bankrupt, like you said. It's going to go from one side to the other. But I think one of the things that you have told me over the years on this note that's pretty relevant is,
you've been like, are you just externally processing, or are you telling me this is something you really want to do? Because I'll say a lot of things and I have a lot of emotions, especially in the moment. And you've done a good job of helping me kind of distinguish between the two for you, because if you get the raw, just kind of stream of consciousness, that can be one heck of a roller coaster to be on. And I think you've learned to be like, hey, when he's going stream of consciousness, I can just discount most of what he's saying, right? It's going to be a different story tomorrow. And, but when he's telling me like, hey, this is real and like, this is, what we're dealing with or what I'm thinking, then I can weight that appropriately.
Yeah. And I still think even in those moments, I have to tell myself, since I'm not a risk person, to not freak out that he has a plan and that, that everything will work out accordingly. But I think also taking, as with a lot of things in life, taking the long view on it, and managing the emotions and looking back to the past and remembering the successes and the milestones that have happened help me to kind of manage those emotions in the moment too, where it's kind of the next step of what we're going to do or how we're going to take the company. I look back at all the milestones that have happened, and then it helps level me out in terms of not being scared about the future.
Well, and I think on that note, a couple of things that have been helpful. Your conservatism has helped me to be more conservative at some key junctures than I would be. I mean, my natural temperament is let's push all the chips in, let's go after it. And that is not always the right emotion, it turns out. And you have helped me at some key junctures to understand when being more cautious and more conservative would be smart. And that's probably part of the reason why we haven't done quite as many, loop-de-loops on the roller coaster, is that some of the things that really could have created hardship or difficulty, you've been able to help me avoid those things and avoid my impulses to, go all in, when a more kind of measured approach would be helpful. So it's another one of those examples of like how I think the balancing out has been really helpful for me as a leader. You've experienced now almost a decade of being the spouse of an entrepreneur, and you've learned a lot during that process. What advice would you give to other spouses of entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think the first piece of advice I would give is that you've got to know it's a long game being the spouse of an entrepreneur. There could be one venture, there could be several ventures, but it really is a long game because entrepreneurship doesn't happen overnight. You can't build a company overnight. Usually, yeah. there are those crazy maybe one-time success stories, but most of the time it takes time and a lot of time in order to see dreams come to fruition. And so I think you've got to know you're in the long game, and so you don't get too caught up on any one moment or day in the company that there might be failure or hardship, knowing that in the long run, their effort, no matter how it plays out, you've got to be their biggest fan and cheerleader in that. And because a lot of times they're going to come home discouraged or trying to figure things out or trying to process things with you, and you've got to be the one to be the sounding board and the encouragement. And so when you know that it's a long game, you can, I think, do that a lot better.
Yeah, one of the gifts that you've given me is just perspective. That when you're in the thick of things, it feels like whatever you're working on is the most important thing and is going to make or break the company. And you just get really myopic and nearsighted, And for me, being able to come home to you and you being able to say, okay, hey, let's back up. Let's zoom out. What's true? Is this going to matter in 20 years? And asking questions has really helped me to keep perspective, which I just think has been one of the hardest challenges when you're really in the thick of it is to keep that perspective. And you said it's a long game. Like you'll hear people say this all the time. Yeah, we were an overnight success story that took 10 years. Like building meaningful things just takes time. Even with technology and the internet and globalism, it still takes time. There were years where we were building this where almost none of our friends had our products or, really knew about the company. They just knew I was doing some entrepreneurship thing, with cups. And obviously now the experience is different, but that's 7-8 years in. And so you being able to keep me focused on the things that really mattered outside of work and also allowing me to keep this larger perspective, I think those were were gifts.
And then another thing I think I would say to the spouses of entrepreneurs is to be as involved as you can be. Talked a little bit about that earlier, but as involved as you can be in the company or in the work that your spouse is doing, I think is really helpful in your marriage. It really builds a foundation, and that could look a lot of different ways. But I think you have to be engaged at some level in order to be really supportive of an entrepreneur. You have to understand all the hardships that they're going through and the challenges that they're facing.
So on that note, we actually haven't talked about this at all up until this point, but a couple of years ago, you started to feel like you had more capacity. That our children were getting older, and you felt like you had the capacity to do more and maybe be a little bit more involved in volunteering with the business. And it was a natural fit for you to come in and help provide some leadership to our giving process. So what motivated you to be more involved on kind of a week-to-week basis with the giving side of Simple Modern?
Well, I think I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier, which is for me, it's all about people's lives being impacted. And so the giving area really made the most sense to me. It was a very tangible way to see how our giving was impacting lives of people on the other side of that. So when there became kind of an opportunity to step into that it, like you said, became kind of a natural fit because that was my heart and my motivation was to really see lives impacted from the company.
So one of the themes of the podcast is not just how we've grown and scaled a company, but how we've tried to do it from a different point of view as a result of our mission. How have we approached giving differently from your perspective than maybe some other businesses or corporations?
So because it is the foundation of what we do, we try to involve every employee in aspects of giving. So one example of that is that we give PTO to employees to be able to go and volunteer their time. It doesn't have to be with a nonprofit that we necessarily support. It can be with anything that motivates them that is in a volunteer capacity. And so that's really one of the ways that we want to involve employees. Another way is through our Giving Champion program with the different nonprofits that we partner with. We have employees that are that point of communication for that nonprofit, and that way they're really able to understand the mission and vision of the nonprofit and bring it back to the company and provide information and opportunities for our other employees and really be, to the word, a champion of that organization within our organization and to let them know all the amazing things that they're doing. And so we've tried to really come up with different ways for employees as a whole to engage and have them understand what's going on at a giving level and not just know that that's being taken care of, but that they could actually play an active role and part in that. We also have a giving committee that's made up of different employees. They can apply to be a part of it. It's a 1-year commitment, and they get to actually be in the room making the decisions about where the financial part will go of our 10% monetary donations. So that's a neat opportunity as well that a lot of employees have taken advantage of.
Yeah, and we actually even give some money to every employee to allocate, right, to different charities.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate, this is one of the places where I think you've brought in leadership and vision of how we've tried to take generosity beyond just writing checks and really become emotionally engaged and involved in the different nonprofits that we're supporting and have kind of more of a holistic approach towards giving. So a lot of memories over the last few years. What are some of your favorite memories from the first 8 years of Simple Modern?
Well, this is kind of more of you said we're not really a Shark Tank type couple in terms of starting the business, but this is kind of maybe one of my more Shark Tank-ish memories was before Simple Modern had an office, all of the current employees the number was small enough that they could fit in the bonus room of our house. So they would meet upstairs in the bonus room of our house, and I would make muffins every Monday for that quote unquote executive meeting. And the cars would fill the neighborhood streets, and our neighbors would say, "What's going on at your house? Are you having some kind of meeting?" And we would say, "Yeah, we're trying to start a company here." But making those muffins and bringing them up is a fond memory because it was so just beginning stages of starting the company. And then I think another favorite memory is in the beginning when the very first office space we had after we met in the house, there weren't even any office, spaces. It was just kind of a big room, and there
Right.
was like one room
One
with a
table.
door
Yeah.
that was kind of a conference room. But I remember taking the kids up to the office to show them, and they were very confused a little bit. Like, where's Daddy's office? Well, it's really just kind of a big room right now, guys.
Right.
We're working towards that. But I have very fond memories of the beginning stages of that, and showing them again how a company is built. But that was a fun time to
Absolutely. Well, Heather, I really appreciate you being willing to do this. I know, as I mentioned, I'm usually the spokesperson, and you are more behind the scenes, and you'd rather not talk about yourself. But I appreciate your willingness to talk about our experience, because I know there's countless people out there that are going through the experience that you've had the last several years, and I think your insights have been really really valuable and will help a lot of people. So I appreciate you being willing to share, and more than that, I appreciate the way that you've supported me as a spouse, because I think it's not false modesty to say I really could not have built this company without you. So very thankful for you, and thankful for everybody listening. So that's it for this episode of Scaling for Good.